Why wouldn't I be? I think it's the most interesting question you can try to answer. How do we measure happiness? Why are some people happier than others? And how do we improve quality of life? I think it's a tremendously fascinating and rewarding question to be working with, and also really enjoy that it's a set of questions that all people can contribute to. So I can have a conversation with everybody from around the world in trying to answer these things. And I think, going back to Aristotle, he said, happiness is the ultimate aim of human existence. I think we all have a desire to be happy, and we're trying to figure out what it takes from a scientific point of view. I think it's, in a nutshell, I think it's being consciously cozy. I think it's the conscious part that sets Danes apart from people in New Zealand and the US and Germany and South Korea, because I think that hygge happens everywhere. I don't think Denmark has a monopoly on hygge, and readers throughout the world have been saying, I've been practicing hygge all my life. I just didn't know there was a word for it. I hear that a lot. So I think what is uniquely Danish is that we have a word that describes that activity, and it's something we do in a very conscious manner, and give value to. So I think it's the conscious part of being cozy, enjoying simple things, taking pleasure in sort of everyday happiness that is the key. But it has a lot of elements, right? I think that's also why it's difficult to describe. It's about togetherness. It's about an atmosphere. It's about, comfort food. It's about feeling safe. It's about feeling relaxed. All these things piled together in one thing. Well, actually, we just lost first place to Norway. But I think that was actually good, because I think it underlines that Denmark does not have a monopoly on happiness either. And the reason why Denmark do well is the reason why all the Nordic countries, Norway, Finland, Iceland, Sweden, do well in the happiness rankings too. Because of the way the society is organized with a high level of taxation, it means there's a low level of uncertainty, there's a low level of anxiety, there's a low level of stress, because, well, you have universal healthcare as well, but a lot of countries don't. There's also equal access to universities. University is free of charge. You get a government grant, and that means that kids or parents are not worried whether they can send their kids to university. There's quite generous unemployment benefits if you lose your job. So I think those things, they sort of elevate the bottom, and that brings up the average. And these rankings are based on averages. So that's why the Nordic countries come out on top. So you can say we're the happiest in the world, or you could say we're the least unhappy in the world. It's the same thing. But until recently, we couldn't understand why Denmark often do better than the other Nordic countries, because we have similar welfare systems. And that's why we started to look at sort of cultural differences, and that's where hygge came in. I think it's, everything is relative. I think Denmark is doing relatively good in reducing stigma and taboo around mental illness, such as depression. I think one of the countries that are struggling the most with the stigma around mental illness and depression is a country like South Korea, which coincidentally also have one of the highest suicide rates in the world, the highest in OECD countries. I think Denmark could go even further. I think it's the UK that are at the top of the list when it comes to reducing stigma around mental illness. I was also pleasantly surprised to see recently the royal family has launched in the UK a campaign to have a conversation, to start talking about mental illness. I would love to see more of that happening in Denmark, but also abroad, because right now there's too much stigma, and there's too much whispering behind closed doors when it comes to mental illness, and it's just illness. It's no different from breaking a leg or suffering from cancer. It's something we should be able to talk about. I think we're doing relatively well in Denmark when we look at a global spectrum, but I think we can definitely do better. I think all countries could go further on this point. One of the things we see matter a lot for mental health and for happiness in general is having a sort of social support network, having somebody you can rely on in times of need. If I can't ask people directly how happy they are, I would find out the strength of their social support systems, because that gives me a pretty good idea of their life satisfaction levels. It's not the only thing that matters, but it seems to be a very important one. So having somebody to talk to, having somebody that listens, somebody who you can be frank and open and vulnerable with is a good start. And of course, then we need to figure out how do we build good societies and cities and sort of frameworks where people will find and grow and have fulfilling relationships. And I think that's something that countries and cities can still try to work with. I mean, if you look at the consumption of antidepressants in 28 OECD countries, Denmark ranks 7th out of those 28 in terms of use of antidepressants. I think, fortunately, the majority is using it in a combination with therapy. The thing is, it's not necessarily good to be at the bottom of that list and not have any use of antidepressants whatsoever. A country like South Korea is second from the bottom in use of antidepressants. And it's not because people are not depressed. The thing is, they're just not getting treatment. So I think being a country that recognizes mental illness, tries to do something about it, subsidize medicine for mental health is a good thing. But of course, it shouldn't stand alone. We should also use the full spectrum of tools to combat the disease. When you look at our diets, it's still very much meat-based, and we know there is a high correlation between intake of meat and some sorts of cancer. So from a health point of view, it probably should be more plant-strong than it is now. A lot of animal fats, a lot of dairy. So I think there are some negative aspects of it. There's a lot of sugar consumption as well. I think what works, for example, there is a high consumption of organic vegetables. I think we have the highest share of organic produce when you look across the European countries. I think it is between 10 and 15% of the food being consumed in Denmark is organic, which I think is the highest within the European Union. So I think they're good and bad to say about the Danish diet. I think they are for most countries, but I think our main issue is that the main sort of traditional Danish diet is quite heavy in terms of sugar and fat and meat. Everything is relative. When I look at, for example, the French, I think they are far better at, having, 3 courses in a meal, and then sort of taking the time to enjoy that. So I think there's something we can learn from the French. They also spend more time eating per day than I think most Europeans. They have lower obesity levels, even despite of that. And then if you take a country like Mexico, they snack a lot. They eat between meal times, far more than the Danes do. So I think we're sort of in the middle of the spectrum. But I think it's fine to enjoy treats from time to time. I think we should allow ourselves to have some indulgence without the guilt. I think if we exercise, if we lead normal, healthy lives, there should also be room for enjoying life, and not just focusing on the numbers of calories. We have one of the lowest working hours per year in Denmark. On average, a 37-hour work week, 5 weeks of paid vacation, good family-friendly policies, and there is also a lot of respect around family time, and everything's relative again, but not a lot of pressure to put in as time, stay at work after 5 just because your boss is there. No, leave at 5, leave at 4 if you need to pick up the kids. That goes for men and women too. Also, men are picking up the kids. So, and I think there's a lot of respect that, okay, when you are at work, you work and you're efficient, but then you also leave at 4 or 5 and that sort of ish. Again, people get stressed in Denmark. People work late, work long hours, have long weeks. Of course, that happens here too. But from a relatively point of view, I think the work-life balance in Denmark is very decent. It's also something that expats, people coming from London or around the world, mention a lot when they start working at Denmark, that the work-life balance here is more generous towards life instead of work. On the short-term basis, I have a new book coming out in September about some of these things, about why Denmark do well in the happiness rankings, but also what works from other countries, other cities, other people from around the world. We are now looking at also at the Happiness Research Institute at different happiness gaps around the world. We are working with a foundation on how to improve quality of life for young people. We're working at what drives satisfaction at work. We've also started to see whether we can take some of these findings, some of the knowledge we have within happiness research, and apply it to city making, so urban design. So we're working with some urban designers in trying to create this sort of urban landscape that will impact quality of life in a positive way.